Correspondent Emerald Robinson, who's standing by in Washington. Emerald, good morning.
Hi, good morning, Rob. Well, talking about our nation's capital, this week, House Democrats are making another push to try to get D.C. statehood. It's called H.R. 51. That's the bill. It recently passed out of the Oversight Committee. So now it will go to a full House floor vote, likely this Thursday, where, again, likely, it is expected to pass along party line votes. But of course, when it gets to the Senate, that's a much different story and a much harder hurdle to overcome, given that the Democrats just don't have that kind of majority in the Senate. Let's say that something does happen, because the Democrats are trying to push forward with this, considering they have almost every lever of power and looking at ways that they can enact more power to get more progressive policies like this passed. Let's say it does pass the Senate. There's already 22 state attorneys general lined up to file lawsuits against the constitutionality of doing so. And the constitutionality of doing this is in question, though Democrats have made pushes many times in the past to try to do this. Look, this is the capital was federal land given from Virginia and Virginia and Maryland that the states didn't want, swamp land, in order to create a federal city that would be outside of any state rule, so that no state would have power or sway over the federal seat of government. Also, there's questions about the amendments. This push to create D.C. statehood and give them voting rights has went back all the way to 1888, where it first failed. In 1960, they tried again. It didn't pass a Democrat Congress, so they came up with the compromise of the amendment, the 23rd Amendment, which gave them votes in the Electoral College. And ironically, Rob, the 23rd Amendment, I know you're a history buff, so you probably already knew this, would be a hurdle in getting D.C. statehood, in that it would have to be repealed by a 2/3 majority of the state ratifying the changes to this amendment. That's unlikely to happen because most states are Republican. Also, talking about the constitutionality, the DOJ has long held that passing a bill to enact D.C. statehood is not acceptable, that it would take a constitutional amendment. So it's an uphill battle, but Democrats are going to go for it again this week, Rob.
It's unbelievable. They've tried this many, many times. It's very clear in the Constitution that D.C. is supposed to remain independent. That was the way the founders laid it out in the Constitution and the Federalist Papers, by the way. But what's interesting to me is if they do get rid of the filibuster, Emerald, then that hill that they have to climb becomes a little bit shorter, doesn't it?
Right. And that's what they see in their sights. If they could possibly talk those couple Democrat senators who are against getting rid of the filibuster, if they can talk them into it, they stand a chance. Also, if they're able to pack the Supreme Court, that goes more in their favor, in the question of constitutionality and the legal battles they would have to face. So they see the greatest possibility they've ever seen before, and they're going to go for it.
Yeah, and guess what's next? Puerto Rico would be next. So we'd have 52 states before Kamala in 2024.
And then there would never be another Republican majority.
Never again. Not in our lifetimes. Absolutely not.
Not in our lifetime.
No. Let's welcome in the rest of the panel for some reaction. We've got former Nevada State GOP chairwoman and Republican strategist Amy Tarkanian with us. Constitutional law attorney and Newsmax contributor Amir Benno is here, and former Trump campaign aide Rick Gates with us this morning. Rick, they tried to do this at the end of Obama's term as well. They've tried to do it for decades now, make Washington, D.C. a state. Basically, as Emerald said, it would be 2 Democratic senators and a Democratic congressman for 700,000 people that live in our nation's capital. But it's not constitutional.
Yeah, this debate has been going on for decades, and I think when we look at it, at its entirety, that there's plenty of, people in the Senate, U.S. Senate, that are not necessarily in favor of it. So I think you have this notion that the Democrats are probably just trying to get it out there to please some of their constituents. Same thing with Puerto Rico. Look, electoral reform, H.R. 1, that bill, again, unconstitutional as well, and I don't think they have a shot at it. But it's all designed to kind of get their voters motivated for 2022 and to make it look like the Democrats are following through on a lot of their campaign promises, but they're not going to materialize because, as you said, constitutionally, you can't do it.
22 years can't erase the pain of what happened at Columbine High School on this day in 1999. Parents sending their children off to school, thinking they're safe, and then the unthinkable happened. 2 students opening fire on classmates after a pipe bomb failed to go off in the lunchroom. Joining us now, attorney and clinical psychologist Dr. Lisa Stroman. Dr. Stroman, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, you were studying with the FBI profile unit when the shooting at Columbine High School happened. Can you take us through that day for you?
Sure. I was an honors intern prior and had been brought on as a visiting scholar to complete my PhD work. And so I had created these friendships and connections with all of the agents. And when it happened, I was actually still in my PhD program in my school. But I think what I was in place of in that Quantico unit was watching these agents go through such an extreme tragedy that had never really had been such a magnitude before in our life. And I remember sitting there thinking, as again, these are expert profilers that I was working alongside of as I was doing my research. And I remember thinking that they had children this age, and the human toll that it was taking just watching them do this professional job and trying to separate those two things, to me was a very big warning sign that as a public we needed to do something more, understanding that this was going to get worse before it got better.
And how is it that you help someone who has gone through a tragedy like this one cope? What is it, if any advice you can give to them to help them continue to move forward with their life, but yes, to compartmentalize those two moments?
It's a lot of support. It's a lot of understanding. It's a lot of listening. I think that the lessons that we learned were really to be told by those that have been involved. I recently interviewed Sue Klebold, one of the shooter's mothers, on my podcast, where she shared that having a brain illness and understanding that the mental health issues of somebody who, what we know now, is both suicidal and has nothing to live for in these school violence situations, even in the situation that's happening at the Capitol and with the Chauvin trial, we don't have a population of everybody that has a mind and a brain that is healthy. And so we need to be really conscientious of what happens when we incite violence or when we introduce things in the Columbine situation of white supremacy. And Harris was in websites and getting radicalized right before his parents' eyes without knowing, because he was on a digital platform. So it's very dangerous when you pull back and you really look at how brains work and how mental health and illness can impact that.
And the third week in April is known now as one of the deadliest weeks of the year. And even the past few weeks, we've seen an increase in violence. Why do you think that is? What is it about this time, or is this just some strange coincidence?
It's not a coincidence to me. I think everybody who's involved from a law enforcement perspective wouldn't think it was coincidental. I think the public would be really shocked to understand that 22 years post-Columbine, that there are hundreds of thousands of followers of this event, those that weren't even alive at the time. And so what happens is that you have this kind of cult-like mentality where they're following through in these footsteps and looking at idolizing this event years and years later that has not been shut down and has not been stopped.
And something you pointed out 22 years ago, this was something that we had not seen at this magnitude. Americans still having the debate over guns since then, but we've also had the Parkland school shooting, Sandy Hook, Knoxville, Tennessee, and unfortunately many other mass shootings in the span of the last 2 decades. People often attributing social media and violent video games, something you touched on a moment ago with social media, but what are your thoughts on those two in addition to mental health?
You know, I think that there's a lot of expert analysis now. The FBI came out with a threat assessment. The Secret Service came out with a threat assessment. And what we know, specifically to violent video games of your question, is that, you know, if you have a child that's playing 1 violent video game or 5 violent video games in a year's time, it's probably not going to impact them the same way as eating 1 donut isn't going to increase in our waistline. But when you start to put those violent video games on a daily basis and you start to influence the cognitive and that psychology of that student, there is a correlation. There has been science done. And I think that we are far, far ahead of where we were at that time in Columbine. And we need to recognize that these are areas that can influence our kids, and we have to start doing something different.
And getting involved with what it is our kids are doing at home when they're in their room, when they're on their computers, on their phones. Unfortunately, it's not helicopter parenting anymore. There's just so much contributing to a child's brain at this point. Dr. Lisa Stroman, all the time we have for now. Thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Newsmax TV is now America's fastest growing cable news channel. We give you the real news you need. So subscribe to our YouTube channel and give us a thumbs up. If you like this video, share it with your friends. Newsmax TV streams live on YouTube for free. Newsmax TV, real news for real people.